Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start this Wyoming Water Development Commission workshop meeting today, March 15th. Um, Commissioner Kaylee. Roll call.
Roll call for March 15th, 2020. Chairman Glick.
Here.
Vice Chairman Yankee. Kaylee Secretary's here. Commissioner Ansami Dalton.
Here.
Commissioner Choma.
Here.
Commissioner Craig.
Here.
Commissioner Cott.
Here.
Commissioner Lawson.
Here.
Commissioner Little. Is Commissioner Little online? No. Commissioner Suker. Not online? Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Commissioner Kaylee. Okay, I guess we'll do the legislative update next. Jason?
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a request on those items 4 and 5.
We'd like to change the agenda a little bit from put 4 and 5 and then 5 into 4.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we reverse the order of item 4 and item 5 on the agenda.
Second.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I will do my best to hit my button when I speak, and you guys can remind me and I'll remind you when we forget. So, okay. All right. So the first item under item number 3 is legislative update. I'm just going to run through the different bills that we've been tracking during the session. It's been quite a roller coaster, I'll tell you. A lot of stuff going on. So I'll try to hit the highlights, and if you have questions, stop me and we can dig into the details if we want. So the first one is House Bill 1, Senate File 1, which is just the budget bill and sets all the agencies' budgets. We're not a generally funded agency, but we do get funding through the mineral severance taxes. And our budget that considers or that includes salaries, benefits, office supplies, travel, vehicles, space rental, et cetera, that all went through just fine. And so no issues, no amendments to Water Development Agency. So House Bill 6 is the ARPA funds for water and wastewater projects. And if you recall, this was the $95 million that was going to be set aside for out of the ARPA funds for water and wastewater projects. It was 85% grant up to a maximum of $7.5 million for those types of projects, if everybody recalls that. It made its way through the House pretty well, but when it got over to the Senate side, it didn't make it. So that bill died, but there was Senate File 66, which I'm going to skip forward to that one because it was more or less somewhat of a backstop to House Bill 6. And Senate File 66, American Rescue Plan Act Recovery Funds appropriations. The way this one was introduced was it had $50 million in for Office of State Lands and Investments to be administered by the State Loan and Investment Board, SLIB, for water and wastewater projects. And when House Bill 6 failed, then there was an amendment brought to Senate File 66 to not only increase that 50 million for water and wastewater projects, add another 45 million. So essentially got it up to the 95 million that we were seeing in House Bill 6. But it then also changed the funding from Office of State Lands to be administered by SLIB to to water development to be administered by the Water Development Commission. So it more or less replaced House Bill 6 at that point. And that went through for a while, but then it got to conference committee. So that conference committee, some of you may or may not know, is when a bill comes out of, say, the House in a different version and it comes out of the Senate. Then if there's not concurrence from the first House and the second House, then they go to conference committee to negotiate where it should end up. So at a conference committee, it then was split back up into 50 million to Office of State Lands and Investments and SLIB for water and wastewater projects, and 45 million for water projects to Water Development Office and Water Development Commission. So that's how it came out of conference committee. And then it has to go across the governor's desk, and the governor line item vetoed out the 45 million for water and wastewater through the Water Development Office. So the way it ended up was there's 50 million in Senate File 66 to state lands administered by SLIB for water and wastewater projects. And the governor did provide some reasoning behind his line item veto. And I think the gist of it was there's a lot of funding potentially going into the SRF program, which I'll get to that in a minute. That's a different bill, or I'll be discussing that, for water and wastewater projects, as well as the 50 million that was kept in Senate File 66, as well as the infrastructure bill and all the funding coming out of that. So really wanted to see over the next year how that was working, addressing water and wastewater projects, and then to potentially revisit this next year's session. So any questions on Senate File 66? So business as usual with our program, because the original House Bill 6, which was the $95 million ARPA, was going to require an application process to be developed, more or less a temporary program to be set up with rules and criteria and all that. So at this point, we're not proceeding with that. Okay, I'll jump back to House Bill 36. That's the severance tax distribution revision. We talked about this briefly at the January meeting. And what this bill does was the cap on mineral severance tax distribution is on a portion of money set at a maximum of $155 million. So regardless of what the severance taxes come in at, it could be $500 million. Our funding is a percentage of a dollar amount that's capped at 155 million. So for instance, account one is 12.45% of that, which equates to about $19.3 million annually coming into our account one funding. This bill wanted to change that cap from 155 million to 200 million to provide roughly $45 million to education. And the percentages would have changed as well. So our 12.45 would have changed to 9.65, right? Because it's on 200 million instead of 155. The only way it could have affected us is if the mineral severance taxes were so low coming in that it dropped below 200 million, then we would have been affected through our funding for our different accounts. However, this bill did not pass introduction in the House. So it died right off the bat, didn't make it out of off the starting line. So don't need to worry about that at this point. The next one is House Bill 73, and this is our omnibus water bill planning. This one has been passed through the House, the Senate, and no amendments. So everything is just as presented and approved through the commission back at our November and January meetings, and what the bill looked like when it went through the Select Water Committee back in January. The one thing I do want to mention here is that the Water Research Program, those folks that didn't make it to the Select Water Commission meeting the day after our January 25th and 6th meeting, on the 27th, the Select Water Committee got together. We were originally looking at the economic impacts of curtailment and demand management in the Colorado River, those impacts on Wyoming. That was one project. And then we were looking at that Willwood project where that was doing some erosion monitoring to determine best management practices to reduce that sedimentation in the Willwood Dam. And then the third project was the evaluation of critical minerals deposits, mainly lithium and rare earth elements in Wyoming, and the economic viability of mining those resources. So if you recall, you guys approved moving forward with those 3 projects. And then when it got to select water committee, they removed the Willwood project and just wanted to move forward with the economic impacts of demand management and the rare earth mineral project. So that's the way it ended up looking in the planning bill when it went through the legislative session. So just want to make everybody aware of that. Any questions on planning bill? And I should say that all the planning contracts that will be considered tomorrow for approval are in this planning bill we're talking about today. So, okay, so the next update would be on House Bill 107. And this one deals mostly with the state revolving fund. Just a refresher, so the Water Development Office, the Office of State Lands and Investments administers the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds. The Water Development Office is involved in the drinking water state revolving fund in a way. So the EPA provides a capitalization grant on an annual basis to the state of Wyoming and other states. And as part of that, the state of Wyoming has to match 20% of that capitalization grant. And the way that's been matched in the past for the drinking water state revolving fund is that 10% of that comes from the mineral royalty grant account. I believe that's administered by state lands. And then 10% of that 20% match comes from account 1 of water development. And in the past, that I think last year, 2021, our 10% match was about $1.1 million. So we were talking about $11 or $12 million coming in from the EPA as a capitalization grant to the state of Wyoming. With the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or the infrastructure bill, that infusion of SRF funds to states is going up dramatically over the next 5 years. We're looking at, I think in 2022, let me see if I can find my numbers here. Let me look at some, bear with me for just a second. Okay, so for 2022, we're looking at, they're not only providing, the federal government's not only providing the regular authorized drinking water SRF appropriation, but then they're adding to that. So in 2022, again, this year we saw 11 or 12 million. In 2022, that's going to jump to 43 million. And by 2026, that's going to jump to 58 million. So significantly larger amounts of federal dollars are going to be coming into the drinking water SRF program. And therefore, the 20% match is obviously going to jump significantly. And what House Bill 107 does, and I'm really just going to focus on the part of the bill that affects the Water Development Commission in our program, is that it will allow for the 20% match. And again, that's half of that comes from water development, half comes from the mineral royalty grant account. It will allow them to also look at if there's additional funds in a mineral royalty grant or the corrective actions account, which is administered by the Department of Environmental Quality, that they could basically take a short-term loan from those 2 accounts and use that as the match money, the 10 and the 20, or the 20% match for these capitalization grants, and then use eligible SRF funds to repay those loans very short term, within a day or a couple days. And those eligible SRF funds that you could do that with are the interest on investments and the interest on repayments of loans and things like that. So they don't have that federal attachment once they go through that. So that's the idea. So I think the intent would be that will potentially save our program from having to come up with these larger 10% matches over the next 5 years and into the future, and possibly leave more money into the water development program to actually get projects done. So it's a good thing. And that went through both the House and the Senate with no amendments and passed. So any questions on that one?
Thank you. Um, Thank you for that. You said it could be paid off. I just wanted to make sure in my notes, I thought you said there's two ways to pay the match that's required. Either, I guess you use the interest from the 58 million in 2026 or something. Is that what it was, Jason? What are the two ways?
The, I think it could still be paid from mineral royalty grant, account one, or essentially the corrective action account. Or if there's additional funds in the mineral royalty grant, that could be used as well. And I would say if you add up all the dollars that are coming from the new infrastructure bill and the infusion of funds into the drinking water SRF program, we're looking at potentially over $300 million of funds coming through in the next 5 years, and roughly 126 million of that will be eligible for principal forgiveness to communities. And that is another word for grants, more or less, in different varying amounts depending on the community. So should be a good thing. Okay, moving on. We already talked about Senate File 66. Senate File 80 is the omnibus water bill construction. And there were 3 amendments to this bill. The first one had to deal with Goshen Irrigation District tunnels. If you recall, we had 2 loans in that project. One was setting aside the 49% of the lands that are in Wyoming and saying, okay, that amount of money for the design is going to be at 67% grant, 33% loan. And then we had a second loan that was for the 51% of the kind of the Nebraska portion of the project. And that was all loan. So on that 51% loan, there was an amendment brought that, and I'll just read it, an annual interest rate. So it was going to be at 20 years at 4% was the way the original legislation was written. It was changed to an annual interest rate equal to the average prime interest rate as determined by the state treasurer in accordance with this paragraph, but not less than an annual interest rate of 4%. To determine the average prime interest rate, the state treasurer shall average the prime interest rate for not less than 75% of the 30 largest banks in the United States. So the intent was if interest rates go up, we're not gifting a loan at a lower rate than they could get somewhere else. So that was the intent, I think, of that amendment. The second amendment on the construction bill was we have 4 projects that were thought to potentially be eligible for the American Rescue Plan Act ARPA direct funds. And those are typically projects that would be eligible under drinking water SRF program. So it's municipal type projects, transmission lines, distribution lines for SRF, storage tanks, things like that. And the Senate appropriations identified 4 projects. One is the Crystal Bypass Pipeline 2022, the Evanston Transmission Pipeline, the Gillette Regional Extension Phase 6, and the Northwest Rural Water System Improvements projects in our construction bill. And they included language or added language to those particular projects that says, if those projects are eligible for this ARPA direct funding and there's funding still available after we get done with the legislative session and bills like Senate File 66 that appropriated a lot of that money, then those projects should utilize ARPA direct before they utilize account 1 money. So we've talked with all those sponsors, heard a few concerns or questions, and the state budget department has hired a consultant to help agencies as well as communities throughout the state, I think, navigate through these ARPA funds and provide feedback on whether a project's eligible, what the federal requirements are going to be, so on and so forth. So we're now working with that consultant to determine what those are. And when we get to tomorrow, I'll just give a little precursor for approval of those particular agreements. We've got our standard water development agreement in the project or the meeting notebook at this point, because we don't have all the answers from this consultant. And most likely, if they're eligible projects, we'll have to put together a slightly different agreement that brings in all the federal requirements. So tomorrow we'll just ask for your more or less conditional approval of the agreement, knowing the agreement might change slightly, but the intent will still be the same. And then the third amendment on the construction bill was an additional $5 million was put into the sponsors contingency funds. So if you recall, the way the bill came out of the January meeting was we had an additional $20 million to account 3. Again, that's dams and reservoirs contingency fund. So the balance to start with was 10. We were adding 20. That would have taken us to 30. And then during the session, 5 million more was added. So the balance is now 35 million. And a lot of that was just realizing what the current bidding environments are and providing as much flexibility and tools as we could to try to navigate hopefully the short term, but could be the longer term as well. So those are the 3 amendments to the construction bill. Otherwise, everything stayed the same.
Oops, sorry, I hit the button. But I was going to ask you a question. So like if you're going to use those direct ARPA funds for the projects, and if it doesn't go through, how does that work? Do we still come back to the our funding to the development office, or how does that work?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And we should know the eligibility before we actually enter into one agreement or the other, or use one agreement or the other. But I would also say that, so yes, your question, just straightforward, the answer to that is yes. If the project were to need additional funds, perhaps, then you'd use the ARPA money first and then use the appropriation, for example, or the account 1 appropriation at that point. But yeah, the ARPA funds would be used first, or just solely ARPA funds if we were able to get the project done with that dollar amount. Okay. All right, any other questions on Senate File 80? All right, the last one I want to give an update on was Senate File 82, and this is a supplemental water development fund funding. Again, just a refresher, this was a bill that would have appropriated roughly $150 million from the general fund to address numerous items. One was the account transfer from account 1 to 2 of the $7 million, and it would have replaced that transfer with general fund money. It put some funding into the groundwater grant program, the account 2 sponsor contingency fund, Fontenelle Reservoir, and the potential purchase of additional water from Bureau of Reclamation out of Fontenelle Reservoir. There was funding in there for the Goshen Irrigation District tunnels, as well as Laprelle Dam, and then also Alkali Creek Reservoir and the Levitt Reservoir expansion. And all those combined was roughly $150 million. This bill throughout the session was amended several times, and the way it ended up was that there are the funding in there for Laprelle Dam in the amount of 30 million, which was the original amount that came out of the November meeting. $25 million for Fontenelle Reservoir and purchase of water, and then 21.81 million for the Goshen Irrigation District tunnels. So those are the same amounts that were originally in the bill. Everything else was stripped out. All these other projects and funding programs, funds for programs and contingency funds and things of that nature. The only other thing I would mention on that was, instead of now coming out of the general fund, it's coming out of the LISRA fund, which is the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. And that was the other change on the source of that funding now.
Can you repeat what that was? The account, Liz?
Yeah, the acronym, the way you hear it a lot is LISRA, but it stands for Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. Okay, I think that concludes the legislative update. Are there any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Jason? Okay, now we go on to project update.
Yeah, and I would real quick ask if, yep, I see Representative Simpson online. Great. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Bill Brewer, our Deputy Director of Construction.
So thank you. We're gonna go over some requests for contingency funds as they originally came in. The first two projects we're going to talk about are related. They're both related from the Eden Valley Irrigation and Drainage District. They bid both of these projects last, I believe, October, and the bids came in substantially high, 50 to 60% over engineer's estimate. So at that point in time, they rejected all of the bids, and under advice from some suppliers and stuff, they appeared to be better off to come back in the spring and rebid those projects. And at this point in time, we are seeing slightly better bid prices for pipe. But as they're trying to put together exactly how much additional funds they would want to come in for to bid these projects and award, I believe their engineers suggested the idea of cutting back these projects. These are phased canal linings. So I'll talk about the first one, the Farson lateral. They basically do as much as they can do in one construction season, which for irrigation is during the winter when water's not flowing. And they can line about a mile. This is 63-inch diameter HDPE pipe that they're replacing, lining this canal with. And they can do somewhere around a mile, depending on the terrain. In this case, they're coming in for about 6,100 feet. But what they're suggesting is cutting back about 500 feet and doing a slightly smaller project that they believe they can get within budget. And then our suggestion was cut back the 500 feet, but then leave the 500 feet as an ad alternate at a per foot rate. And then if we get good bids in, we'll add back in as much as we can and get as much of the project done, and then pick up the rest on the next phase, which would be next construction season. In this case, the second advantage of this idea is they've already secured NRCS funding for that remaining work. And we are currently at a 60-40% grant on this. We do 60% grant, the sponsor comes up with the other 40. That our NRCS grant is 75%. So we would be coming back with a 25% grant. So not only would we not be using contingency funds now, when we do that, pick it up in the next phase, next construction season, it would be at a lower percentage. The other project is slightly different. It's a sand trap. They have a section of the canal that goes through and picks up a lot of sand as going. And the sand trap takes that water and dumps it off the canal and basically cleans the canal of the salt or of the sand. But it uses a considerable amount of water to do that flushing process. They got a Basin States, actually, I believe it's a Smart Water grant for 46% of the project to do a better design, a more modern design on the sand trap that would, one, use less water to flush the sand out of the canal, and at the same time recover a portion of that water and divert it into another ditch to be reused. So this one is a 54% grant from Water Development and a 46% grant from Bureau of Reclamation, Smart Water. So the structure itself would still be built in full, but there's a portion of canal that they were also going to line with this project, and they're talking about cutting back 250 feet of the 1,000 feet they were going to do, with the same idea as the next phase of this construction would pick up that 250 feet and go on. They also have NRCS grant funding for this at 75%, so we would pick that back up again at 25% grant. So it's the office's recommendation that we accept their method of not asking for contingency and doing what we would call a variable bid to award the amount of contract that they can with the funding they have, and then pick up the rest later. So.
Mr. Chairman, we'll take action on this tomorrow's meeting. We're just providing this as information today. But if you guys have any questions today, we'd be happy to answer them on both these projects.
Mr. Chairman. Can you explain the percent breakdown a little bit? I'm a little bit confused. It sounds like with some NRCS grant or cost share, that then we would pick up the balance of the 25%. I'm not sure I quite understand.
Okay, I'll try. So currently, the first project I mentioned, we have a 60% grant and the Bureau of Reclamation has a 40% grant. So we're paying 60, they're paying 40. The next phase of this project, because these are all ran in multiple phases to get the work done, because they can only do so much per construction season. The next phase, instead of using Bureau of Reclamation funding, they're using NRCS funding, and that will be a 75% grant versus the 40% grant they have right now. And the commission would be picking up the 25%. So we'd be going from 60 to 25. On the other project, it is a 46% grant from Bureau of Reclamation Smart Water. That would also be changing over to an NRCS grant of 75%. So we'd go from 54% down to 25% on the next phase of each of these projects.
Any other questions or comments for? Sorry, what's your name again? Bill Brewer.
Bill Brewer. Okay. Okay, so the next project we're going to talk about is the Levitt Reservoir. Believe all of you know about the Levitt Reservoir. It's a combination replacement enlargement.
Do have some folks on the line.
Okay. And we do have some of the sponsors representatives online. If there are questions after this that you want to ask of them.
Can we please have them introduce themselves before we move forward, please? Can they hear us or what?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Eden Valley was on the line, and I think as soon as we got done talking about that, they dropped off. So I'm not sure we have anybody from Levitt at this point. So we'll let Bill continue.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about the Levitt Reservoir, which is a replacement enlargement of an existing reservoir on the west side of the Bighorns, north of Shell. We discussed this project in January meeting. On January 11th, we received one bid for the construction of this project. Negotiations with the bidder, the sole bidder, were started. And at this time, we've reduced that to about 66.6 million. And we're nearing the end of our ability to award this contract. We're actually already over the original 60-day limit that the contractor was required to hold their bid. They have agreed to hold for an additional 30 days. However, based on the current estimate, keeping a minimal contingency available and with some additional engineering changes that we'll need to update the plans and specifications related to some of the negotiated changes that between the contractor and the engineer. Some ways the contractor thought they could do the work cheaper and but obtain the same result. So we'd be looking at needing to move approximately 26.7 million to keep the project moving forward. And that amount would nearly exhaust the account 3 contingency funds. We also need to have somewhere around 3 million of those contingency funds available for the Big Sandy or the Middle Piney Reservoir project. We've discussed that back in August, and that we're still trying to finish up that project. So by funding both of those projects at the estimated amounts right now, we would be down to about 9% of the current account 3 contingency fund remaining. So there are a few options on how we could move forward. We could move contingency fund over and award the project. We could potentially move contingency funds over and rebid the project, or we could reject the bid and come back in later on and look at rebidding the project.
So, Mr. Chairman, we do have Representative Simpson on Zoom, and like to give him an opportunity to address this project as well as a representative of the Select Water Committee.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Evan.
Hey, it's sure nice to be with you folks. Appreciate Director Mead giving you the legislative update. Just so you know, members of the Select Water Committee felt really good about the way we fared out in the legislature, particularly in the House. We had very, very strong support of our both municipal projects and our irrigation projects. And so we feel really good about where we're going with the new infrastructure money coming in. It's going to be a huge boom to our communities and our irrigation districts. So we're really excited about that. Folks, I'd like to visit with you particularly about the Levitt project. Now we have this policy in the Select Water Committee that we appropriate some money and we grab it out of account 2 or account 3, in this case account 3, we slide it into a discretionary account that we have the ability to float a little bit of money back and forth. So when we have a construction project going on that is a few million over, we don't have to go take a full year and go back to the legislature. We actually can reach into this contingency fund, slide it across and approve it. So the money is there. And then we have the Levitt project that came in significantly over budget and would require over $26 million to be taken out of the contingency fund and slid in. And as the chairman of the Select Water Committee, I need to share with you, I have a huge concern about doing that on this project. This contingency funds, what we've envisioned is it would just be a few percent that would be borrowed. Up to 10% of a project could be slid across without a lot of public notices and literally going back to the legislature to share them with what we're doing. So those kinds of slide across are appropriate. But in this application, $26 million of basically unapproved money, because it's in the contingency and you folks have the authority to slide it across tomorrow if you choose to. But in talking with my Select Water Committee, we strongly urge you to resist that. We believe it could put a very bad rap and bad experience with both your commission and our committee sliding that much money across. That's over 50% of what was originally appropriated. That's just too much. We really need to go back to the legislature and appropriate the money specifically to that purpose and frankly reevaluate whether the feasibility of the project is legitimate enough that we gain the value compared to the $70 million that we're planning to drop into the project. So we're asking you to reject the current bid and rethink it. Let's spend another year, even though it's going to cost us more money to do that. But the $26 million horizontally sliding is just makes us shiver. So we respectfully request that you send this one back to the drawing boards. And if everything's good, we can appropriate the money next year, but at least it's gone through the proper chain of authority. So with that, Chairman, do you have any questions for me or your committee?
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Representative Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Representative Simpson. I have a question. So what happened I know Jason went over all that stuff very well. It was in Senate File 82 that they killed off the Levitt part in that bill. They only left Fontenelle, Goshen, and LaPrelle. Was there something against Levitt at that point for adding it in? Do you remember? I know it might have died in the Senate. I'm not sure where it was pulled out.
Mr. Chairman, Lisa, you know the way the senators work over there. I was not privy to that. It was actually Senator Hicks negotiating with the rest of the Senate body. The 152 million out of the general fund was not going to fly. And it was a function of the entire bill going down if they didn't trim it back. And so it was negotiations on that side that I was not privy to that really just came down to the three projects left on in the bill.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments for Representative Simpson? Thank you, Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's sure a pleasure to be with you. I wish I could be there live, but after getting home from the session on Saturday night, I just did not have the willpower to get back in my car and drive back to Cheyenne. So thanks for letting me zoom in. Appreciate all your good work.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jason.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to wrap up that discussion on Levitt Reservoir, tomorrow you'll be hearing a recommendation from us, similar to what you've just heard, to recommend against additional funding from Account 3 Contingency Fund for that project, reevaluate the project over the next several months and year, and bring it forward in next year's construction bill. So you'll be seeing a recommendation next November to basically amend that original appropriation. I would say this is a very good project, in my opinion. The economic benefits that have been determined or calculated are $118+ million. 80 million of that is public benefit economics or economic benefits to the public. And there's a lot of support. We provided in your meeting folders today, letters of support from the district, as well as some of the shareholders for that potential water once it gets built. And so I'd encourage you to continue to think about this project in a positive light, because we do think it's a good project. It would have a lot of benefits to not only the direct irrigators, but to that community in the state of Wyoming, and just keeping ag relevant with everything going on right now that's makes agriculture and ranching and farming pretty difficult. So this is a good project.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I had a question for Jason. Is that benefit information's in the book as well, or just the letters?
Mr. Chairman, just the letters are in the folder. We've got some, I guess, calculations that were done for the environmental impact statement from the engineer that we had on board at the time. If you're interested in that, I can provide you that on the side. Okay. Yep.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to the next agenda item. Okay.
Sorry, I took you off because I hit my button.
For those of you that are online, can you please introduce yourselves? Let's see, what's that first one on this side? Who's these guys on that side?
So, Mr. Chairman, we have Sarah Good and John Ed Anderson, and they may have just dropped off, from the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District, representing the Levitt Reservoir Expansion Project. There they are again. Can you guys hear us? You might be muted. We can see lips moving. You're still muted. Can you hear us, Sarah?
Can you hear us now?
Yes. Yeah. If you can shut the original camera off, then I don't think we'll get the feedback. But we just finished up talking about the Levitt Reservoir expansion. If you have anything you guys want to say, go ahead.
You're still muted.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. We were trying to sign in. We heard the whole thing, but it would never let us in on the.
Yes. Yeah. If you can shut the original camera off, then I don't think we'll get the feedback. But we just finished up talking about the letter of resignation. If you have anything you guys want to say, go ahead. You're still muted. They're hearing a YouTube.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, we'll see if they come back. In the meantime, we can maybe get set up for our next discussion item. Okay.
Let's just take a 10-minute break to get everything situated. How's that sound? Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break.
On the corner, to your left, on the bottom corner.
So,
Pete Roush with Respect, I think, or whoever wants to start for LaPro.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think I heard Jason cue me in there.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Yeah, I'm Pete Roush with Respect, engineer and project manager on this one. See, we got Colt, Phil, and Anna from Laprelle Irrigation District online, as well as Verena Winter is HDR technical lead, and you got Corey Foreman in the room there in case you have any really hard questions for us. We'll get started. Go ahead, Miranda. Just want to give a kind of a brief recap where we've been and what we've done since last talking, since our last update for it, which of course was the tour back in August, which we were really blessed with a beautiful day, and I hope that was a valuable experience for everybody to see the existing dam and really get on the ground and see what we're working with here. Go ahead, Miranda. So we'll just recap real quick, where we've come from to get here. Next slide. And of course, it all started with when we were looking at rockfall and then noticed, some apparent issues on buttress 17 of the dam circled there on the slide. Next slide. Got a closer look at that and discovered this 12-foot vertical crack on buttress 17, which was enough to implement a storage restriction at that time. We refocused all our efforts on a very thorough inspection, which occurred in December of 2019. Next slide. This, of course, is a map of all the cracks that were found on all the buttresses overlaid there, and what really confirmed, just how bad some of our concerns are for structural integrity of the existing dam. And so we then refocused all our efforts towards evaluating options for moving forward. Next slide. Main thing with our concerns on this, of course, with the dam being high hazard due to potential for loss of life, loss of infrastructure downstream in the event of a failure, and over 600 people at risk in that case, ultimately determining this dam's past the end of its useful life. Next slide. So we'll jump into some of the design advancement here. Go ahead. Through that analysis of design options, we ultimately determined that a new roller compacted concrete dam constructed just downstream of the existing one would be the most feasible option. And what we've been doing since about this time in 2021 has been working towards advancing that design. Go ahead. So where we left off with the tour, we were just about to get our geotechnical investigation underway. And that was, more extensive mapping of the geology. And then we had planned a program of 9 different drill holes at the site, and as well as some geophysical investigation. And so the program really kicked off. It was the Sunday after the tour, August 15th. And driller mobilized in and started with, on that map on the right-hand side, the upper left corner shows hole number 9, which is kind of around the bend downstream from the dam. The intention of that one was to characterize Casper sandstone as a potential aggregate for construction. After that, the driller moved up to the dam outside of the channel, and this was going on during irrigation season, so there were still releases, channel was still flowing, and driller knocked out the 4 boreholes outside the channel, and timing worked out really well, finishing up outside the channel just after irrigation season was done, and then the driller moved up the channel following that yellow line, which really starts up by the bridge, to the four boreholes down in the channel. And those all went really smooth. Near the end of that, in-channel boring, we also got the geophysical team out there, collected those lines, and that's represented on this map, those blue lines, which the geophysical survey, really is an understanding of what the geology is along those lines, and correlated with the drilling that was done. Go ahead, next slide. So these are just some interesting photos from the drilling. And they're on the left, down on the lower access road in front of the dam. And over on the right is up on the top access road. Next slide. And of course, getting into the creek, we hired a contractor to prepare a trail up the creek, prep the pads for drilling up in that area, and got through some tough spots of the creek using these wooden mats. Pretty interesting the way that all played out. And you can see there the drill rig moving up the creek. It was actually remote control operated to drive it. So that phase 1 drilling program we had, we finished up, demobilized, got everything out of there on October 11th, Monday, October 11th. And you might recall that October 12th, we were hit with a winter storm that pretty well shut down most of the state. So we got out of there just in time. And really the drilling program went really well, finished ahead of schedule and under budget. Go ahead. So again, before we had the tour, we had, it was in early June that we had done bathymetric survey, using sonar from a boat on the reservoir. And then at the time of the tour, we were out there collecting LiDAR, everything outside, above the water surface elevation. And then, of course, we combined those two data sets to produce the map you can see on the right, and have a good updated understanding of that bathymetry, that volume of the reservoir. Go ahead. We also did a thorough LiDAR and imagery scan of what we're looking at here is the West Canyon wall downstream from the dam. And this being kind of a critical area, this is where we'll be looking to tie in that left abutment of the new dam, kind of in the area of what's labeled middle bump and north bump there. And so really, characterizing that geology and understanding, and direction and characteristics of different jointing. Go ahead. And so with all that information that was collected, of course, we're moving the design forward. And we're at the point today where just delivered draft design documents of what we're calling an appraisal level design, about 10% is what we've been shooting for here, and delivering a report of our basis of design, the geotechnical data report, everything we did with hydrologic routing and analysis that went into designing spillway and outlet works. Of course, our structural analysis, reporting on that, and a cost and constructability update. And just to take a moment looking at the image we've got on the slide, it's kind of an updated rendering of the appraisal level design here. And if you see really in the middle of the channel, that the big main spillway there is tend to be sized to pass up to 1,000-year event, which would be about 25,000 cubic feet per second coming down. And anything above that, really we're designing for up to the probable maximum flood, making sure the dam survives that. So anything above the 1,000-year, looking at overtopping on either side of that main spillway coming down. And you can kind of see we've got on either side, we call training walls to redirect those overtopping flows, make sure everything's directed towards the middle of the channel downstream. And then the interesting feature of this is, especially on the main spillway, you can see how it kind of looks like, you might say it looks like a ski jump, and that's intentional. It's called a flip bucket design. And what that design is intended to do is with those larger flows, as it comes down the spillway, they'll be launched launched away from the toe of the dam, which helped dissipate energy and, of course, keep scour away from that toe. So back to our cost and constructability here, mainly cost. We had done some very preliminary cost estimates for comparison at the time of that design options analysis. And so going back to where those, where that had left off specific to this RCC dam option, and updating everything based on our updated design, and bringing those costs forward to 2022. Where we sit right now, our cost estimate is 84 million for the dam, and that includes construction, non-contract costs, which some design and management of the construction, as well as some contingency at this point. And what's worth noting is, in bringing those costs forward from August of 2022, or excuse me, August of 2020 to now, and using the Bureau of Reclamation's cost escalation guidance, the escalation to get over those 1.5 years is 15%, and that's very notable because typical would be in the range of 2 to 3. And so a lot of uncertainty, as I think everybody knows, with where things are and have been, a lot of uncertainty around costs and inflation and where things might go. But ultimately, that is our updated cost for construction of the dam today, is 84 million, and really putting a range around that of 67 million up to potentially 112 million. That's our range of confidence. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, looking ahead to next steps with the dam, not only water development, but also looking at the state engineer's office has a contract with HDR to evaluate risk, not just the Laparelle Dam, but it is one of the main focuses. Understanding risk at the dam and looking at any mitigation that may be recommended through that. That's getting going here. And then specific to water development efforts and what we're looking at for 2022, with some of the remaining budget that was saved with the geotech investigation, as well as the discretionary funding, we're moving ahead with a site-specific seismic study. And that's really our next critical item as we move forward specifically with the structural analysis and design. And some work has been done by the Bureau of Reclamation, looking at, I think it was Guernsey and Pathfinder, and really there's too much of a gap in that data that the design team decided, really we need to fill in that gap with a site-specific study. So that is just getting started. And then, of course, we're looking ahead for additional geotechnical investigation this year. I'm calling it our phase 2 geotech, building on what was done last year, and trying to fully characterize the foundation and understanding the geology at the site. Also, as far as moving forward with hydraulics, spillway and outlet works, the next big step here is we've gone kind of as far as we can with conceptual design, and we really need to understand now how will that function with significant floods. And the way to do that is with a physical model. So these photos on the slide are just an example, but an existing dam under flood conditions, and the bottom photo showing the scale model of that same dam with a scaled flood going through it. This is really to understand, especially with those flip bucket spillways, and trying to direct what is called really the flood jet coming off of those. Make sure that's directed where we want it to go. Understand how that scour can affect the channel bottom, and tweak the design from there. It's something we can't really do with a computer model. And then, of course, as that's all going on, continuing to advance towards about a 30% design. We're at a point now where we've developed, along with this appraisal level design, we also have a plan set, small basic plan set, and enough information that we could start coordinating with different agencies and looking at, kind of pre-planning for the NEPA process. So go ahead, next slide. But really, that's the end of the update. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Is it Pete, right? Is it Pete?
Pete, yeah.
I guess there's no questions. So, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, I would just add, Pete mentioned the upcoming work that we're planning to try to get accomplished here, such as the phase 2 geotech and potentially getting into 30% design. So just wanted, that's a bit of a precursor for what you might be seeing in May to add to their contract for continuing forward with this work. I would say that we're trying to balance what we're doing here in regards to spending state funds and still trying to figure out from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there's some legislation in there that I think was specifically written for LaPrelle Dam, even though it's not specifically stated that way. And the governor's office has submitted a letter to the Bureau of Reclamation and per the requirements of the act, the language in the act, and we're waiting to hear back from them on what this funding potentially is going to look like. So we've heard some positive feedback from our congressional representatives that have helped us with that, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation. So we're, like I said, trying to balance moving the project forward, but also taking advantage of that federal funding as soon as we can, assuming it comes to fruition here. So.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Jason? Thank you, Pete, for your presentation. And so I'll move on, I guess, to the next tunnel rehabilitation. Is that what it is? Okay.
Hit the right button. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Kevin Strecker. I'm the new manager for Goshen Irrigation District. Just took over about a month ago. So I just want to say, since this is the first time being in front of you, working with Goshen Irrigation the last 8-9 years, I've had the opportunity to work on many projects that the commission has funded. So I just want to say thank you for your past support and your support going forward. It's very appreciated. So on this project here, we hired HDR about 7 months ago to help streamline our project down to a few alternatives. We had so many different alternatives coming at us, different funding options, that we were just very overwhelmed. So about 7 months ago, we hired HDR to help streamline this operation, come down to 5 or 6 good options. And I'm happy to say that in February, at our board meeting in February, our commissioners voted unanimously to go with one preferred option. So the last 7 months really paid off. So Corey Foreman is here from HDR to do a short presentation on how we came to this decision and what our plan forward is. So.
Gifted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Corey Foreman. I'm a project manager for HDR. Today, I was just going to give a quick update, as Kevin mentioned, the process that we have undertaken since about last September, and leading towards mapping out the path forward for this tunnel rehabilitation process. So, next slide. So when we came in, there had been a lot of work that had been done the previous 2 years. So we wanted to compile all that information in a way that was usable to help guide the decision-making process for both the Goshen Irrigation District Board and the accompanying board on the Nebraska side, Gering Fort Laramie. And so we did that by conducting, and really following water development procedures, a feasibility analysis kind of equivalent to or similar to a level 2 feasibility study through water development. This was, again, to evaluate the options that are available for rehabilitation, to provide that information to help guide the decision-making process. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure that we met any operating criteria for water development if and when it was approved or possible to move forward with a level 3 project with your commission. So we did this by we did this using a multi-criteria decision analysis tool. And really the purpose of that is you rank each of the options on 3 independent factors. The first being non-economic criteria, the second one being the capital cost of what does it cost to construct it in today's dollars. And then the third piece of information is a life cycle analysis that looks at depreciation over time, as well as operation and maintenance costs into the future. So ultimately, in that multi-criteria decision analysis tool, we ended up ranking 6 different options. I want to, clarify that there was a lot of other options that were evaluated, that were considered, discussed, and these were deemed to be the top 6 most feasible options. So just because they're not listed here, other, in particular, different tunneling technologies were evaluated and ranked against each other, and these are the 6 that kind of made the final cut to go into the final evaluation and ranking process. These 6 options really fall into 3 different categories: repair, replace, and removal options. The first being a steel liner option, which is putting a structural replacement option or liner inside the existing tunnel liner, which would shrink the diameter slightly. Similar to that, but it's just a different technology for replacement. The second option is a carbon fiber reinforced polymer technology. That's, again, a repair type option. We evaluated 2 different replacement options using a sequential excavation method. And essentially, this is putting in a new tunnel. And the 2 options for replacing the tunnel would be to put in this SEM tunnel on alignment. I mean, going through the existing tunnel opening, which limits the amount of material that you would have to excavate, but it would remove all of the infrastructure that's currently in place, which is part of the infrastructure that failed back in 2019. The other option that was evaluated is putting a new SEM tunnel off alignment, off to the side, one side or the other, so you have a brand new tunnel at the end of the day. We also evaluated 2 different removal options, one of which was an open cut option, which would just basically you would remove all the material above the tunnel and you have a big, kind of wedge, and it would just be the canal going through through where the tunnel was before. So it'd be an on alignment, but the tunnel would be gone and just be an open cut, canal going through there. A similar kind of thought process is a cut and cover option, where you would remove all the material above it and then replace the tunnel with a precast, like box culvert or concrete arch structure, and then replace the material above it. And so you would have minimal surface disturbance long term. You'd reclaim it back to the uses that are there now. These are the 6 options that were ranked into that MCDA tool that we used. So just to focus a little bit on the non-economic criteria side of things for just a moment, it's kind of a 3-step process. The first step, and this process that we did to perform this work to develop the non-economic criteria was we did in conjunction with both Goshen Irrigation District and Gering Fort Laramie together. We had a 2-day workshop here in Cheyenne in December to get input from all affected parties. And the first step of that process was to create the ranking criteria, for the non-economic ranking. And those are what are shown on the screen right now. Those 6 categories were operability and maintenance, constructability, risk and consequence of failure, hydraulic capacity, permitting, and public safety. Next slide. The second step in the process, though, is not all of those ranking criteria are deemed even or equal. And so you have to rank and weight each of those criteria against each other. And so this was a big focus of the workshop we did collaboratively. And so what that tells you is if you look at like constructability compared to operability and maintenance, well, constructability is much less important in the eyes of the irrigators and the irrigation districts than the long-term operation and maintenance of that canal. And so what you can see on the right-hand column is that is the ultimate ranking score for each of those criteria, where the hydraulic capacity of the tunnel was deemed to be the most important to the irrigators, whereas permitting and constructability were the least important of those weighting factors, with the assumption that at the end of the day, through proper design, you could construct this solution and you could get it permitted. So once you have the factors, the 6 factors were in place, we had the weighting factors for each of those 6 factors. We took those 6 options that I previously mentioned and we assigned a score. Essentially, it's a 1 to 5 score. We have words on the slide that correspond to it. Everything from a low score, which is equivalent to a 1, up to a very strong is the words we use, which is about equivalent to a 5. We did that through each of those 6 options to come up with the total non-economic ranking. And those are the scores that are shown in the right-hand column. And as you can see, there's a couple that were fairly close. The open cut option, based on the non-economic criteria, actually scores as the best solution to move forward with. However, an SCM enlargement through the existing tunnel ranks right behind it. They're very, very closely together. So if you go to the next slide. So after we had that process completed, now we spent some time evaluating the preliminary design and coming up with some the capital cost estimates for each of the 6, and we also performed the life cycle analysis. Those were the other 2 pieces of information that were important in this process. And this is a figure that kind of displays each of those pieces of information to help you kind of visualize what we're looking at. And so the non-economic criteria score is the x-axis. And so that you want to have a high score. So you want something to be on the far right-hand side of this. The life cycle analysis is actually what's shown on the y-axis. And so that is in net present value or the units. So that's the life cycle costs in terms of today's dollars. That's the y. So you want to be low on the scale on the y-axis. And so what you're really looking for is you're looking for what circles, what options plot the lowest and to the farthest right. And you see 3 of them that are fairly close together. The SEM new tunnel alignment, the SEM through the existing alignment, and the open cut options. The last piece of information, and one that's very important, I think, to everybody in the room, is the capital cost. What does it cost to construct now? That is represented on this figure as the size of the diameter of the bubble, or the dots that you see there. And so while you can see, and so really if you look at it, you start to get 2 that are they overlap. And that is the blue circles are the SEM, the new tunnel on alignment through the existing tunnel, and the open cut, which is the green dot, which is, removing the tunnel and all the material above it. And actually, if you look at it, while the open cut scores a little bit better, the SEM option is a lower initial capital cost. So those numbers, if you look at it, just to read the graph in front of you for tunnel 1, and we did this for both tunnel 1 and 2, the open cut option, our preliminary estimate is about $33 million, 32.7 is the number on the slide, for a capital cost, whereas the SEM tunnel through the existing tunnel comes out to be 20.4. So about, $13 million less. Next slide. We also, we repeated the process with very similar results for tunnel 2. Again, SEM is a slightly cheaper, and the scores on the non-economic score are very, very closely linked together. Next slide. So ultimately, that led to the board meeting right about a month ago today, where the boards came together. We presented all this information through a series of stakeholder meetings, both in Nebraska and in Wyoming. And then we attended both board meetings for Gary Fort Laramie Board Irrigation District, as well as Goshen Irrigation District boards, presented all this information. And this was the decided upon path forward. As Kevin mentioned at the beginning, it was a unanimous decision by the board, which really shows that we have, a clear path and a desired path forward. That recommendation was to advance the SEM tunnel replacement on alignment with optimization from open cutting, possibly shortening the tunnel or enlarging the diameter slightly just to get the most optimized, cost-effective solution to move forward. What this does is by going with the SEM as the preferred method, like I said, it maximizes the value, the efficiency on cost and performance of the tunnel. The real driving factor for it is the SEM just minimizes and mitigates potential risk that the open cut presents related to potential permitting when you're disturbing the surface to that level. Next slide. So we're in the process of writing that up right now. It's similar to a level 2 feasibility report, and we're looking for what are the next steps forward. So as we hope to move into a design phase, the next steps would be to perform site investigation. Similar to what Pete just talked about on Laparelle, there's a certain level of topographical survey, geotechnical drilling, some in-tunnel surveys and scans, and ultimately some geophysics, both from the surface and then the tunnel, to really understand the material that the existing tunnel is in, identify any void spaces, which is very important for the constructability aspect of design. In addition to site investigation, we will be doing and creating a computational fluid dynamic model to help us understand the hydraulics and how water will flow, the functionality of the tunnel. And then that information from both the site investigation and the modeling aspect of it will be used to ultimately design the tunnel replacement option. This summer, we hope to continue conversations with the agencies. We've been meeting with the federal agencies, and there's actually 3 federal agencies involved, as the Bureau of Rec owns the tunnel. The BLM owns surface at both tunnels. And then there's also the Fort Laramie National Historic Site. So the National Park Service will have a voice in the review process for any of the permitting process. Conversations have already been had between the agencies, and we hope to continue that and advance into a NEPA process, hopefully later this summer. Ultimately, all of this is being done to get to the end goal of construct a new tunnel. And best case scenario, if all the stars aligned, we would like to go to construction in fall of 2023, so about 1.5 years from now. That is a very aggressive schedule, and there is risk, and there's certain aspects that are completely outside of our hands, in particular the agency review, because there's 3 federal agencies that will have a role in the permitting process that could extend out outside of our control. Now, by doing the SEM on alignment, we hope to keep this at a categorical exclusion, or at worst at an EA. Basically, the guidance from the 2 boards collectively are any options that would trigger an EIS, which could take anywhere from 3 to 5 years or more. We want to avoid that. And based on the preliminary conversations we've had with the agencies, we believe going on alignment, we can avoid an EIS route. But the other aspect of it is the Bureau of Reclamation does own this tunnel, and they will have to review and approve our design. How long they take to review and approve the design is outside of our control as well. Next slide. And with that, I think that's our update for today. Entertain any questions.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, one more just quick update. I guess I was kind of anticipating a question as well. There, as Jason mentioned in the legislative update, in the supplemental water funding bill, there was the 21.8 million. Jason will have to get the details right for me. If you add up the numbers that I presented there, it's about $45 million estimate. And so that supplemental bill equates to about half of that. That is because, as I mentioned, Gary Fort Laramie owns 51% of the irrigated land served by this canal. And so as such, they are required to pay 51% of the bill. There is currently legislation moving forward in Nebraska. Their session is a little bit longer than it is here in Wyoming. So they have a couple of months to go. but funding for the Nebraska portions of the rehabilitation of their 51% of the $45 million estimate. That has been identified in the governor's budget as one of his top 10 priorities. That legislation has been introduced. It is passed through appropriations and is now, I believe, on the House floor. Now, their process is going to take a little bit longer time, but so far all the stars are aligning that they don't anticipate any pushback on that. So things are looking good to have approval of that bill or through the legislative process here in the next month or so.
I have a question for you. So how does the funding work if it comes from Nebraska? Does it go to the Wyoming Water Development account? Is that how that works?
The way it usually works is the way we've been working it so far, like on the repairs, is we do everything through our office, and then we submit an invoice to Nebraska. They pay us, then we ask for reimbursement from wherever we're getting our money from. So that's the way we've been working it. Or it can go through Reserve Works through the Bureau of Reclamation, which is kind of the same process. We pay for it, then turn that into the Bureau of Reclamation. Then Nebraska pays them and the Bureau pays us back. So.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, this question probably is more for Jason, just because, so if that's okay, I mean, it goes to the point, but so you told us, I think Fontenelle was 25 million, Goshen was 21.81 million, and LaPrelle was 30 million is the estimate, which is over obviously the amount that they're coming up with here, if they're saying an estimate of 45 million. So, but if we're getting 150 million, does the rest of the money just stay in after Senate File 82? Does the rest of the money just stay with us since they didn't fund the other items, or what happens with that money?
Mr. Chairman, whatever is not spent for Goshen Irrigation District, for example, I'll back up a step. So for that money to be, I guess, sent to the Water Development Commission accounts, it'll have to come through a construction bill next year or the year after, depending on when it's ready. And then at that point, the funding can be transferred from the LISRA account to Water Development, I believe. Whatever is not spent will go back to the LISRA account. So we don't get to keep whatever funding we don't spend in water development.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. So Jason, that means we just, whatever the cost is, the rest of the 150 million goes back. We can't use it for anything else is what you're saying, correct?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the 150 million was the original, it was like 152 million for the supplemental water bill. That's been pared back down to roughly 75 million with the 3 projects. But yes, each project is the same. Whatever is not spent for that particular purpose for that project goes back to the LISRA account.
Any other questions or comments for Jason? Thank you. Jason, so what is the next item?
Mr. Chairman, the next item is the new level 1 and 2 applications that we received. The deadline for our planning applications was March 1st, and I'll hand it over to our Deputy Director of Planning, the Barry Lawrence.
Good to see you, Barry.
There we go. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to walk you through the new level 1 and 2 applications, as well as talk about the process. And since I'm about the last thing on the agenda, I'm standing in between you and tip-off in about 4 hours. I'm not going to belabor this point. So we're going to walk through things. If you turn to tab A in your notebook. Like I said, I'd like to talk a little bit about the applications themselves and then remind you of the process, because, you know, it's been a year and some of you, sometimes you forget and so forth. And I know every year we think about it. Oh yeah, how do you do this process? So we're going to walk through it again, remind everybody. Applications were due and you on that timeline chart there, and that's what I'm going to talk about first. And kind of on the top part of that chart are things that are more commission related, and the bottom part below the line are things that are more internal to the office. So that's kind of the cheat sheet there. So March 1st of this year was our application deadline. We did receive 17 applications this year for level 1 and 2 planning studies. And that compares to 7 last year. Give you an idea. So more than double. Since we received those applications, we have assigned project managers to each project, and they're in the process of setting up site visits for those going out with the sponsor, looking at the various projects. One of the things we're going to need, and we'll talk about this a little more later, is that we assign we assign commissioners to each of these projects. And we typically assign 2 commissioners to each project. And I know a bunch of you have been involved in this process before, so you know the drill. Basically, you will shadow the projects from the inception, from the application, all the way through consultant selection into, if it gets funded, then notice to proceed, contracting, notice to proceed, and then off scoping meetings, kickoff, and then to the final end of the project when you have final deliverables and a public presentation. So you kind of shadow the project throughout. So we'll need 2 commissioners assigned to each project. And where possible, we try to assign them by your water division, but that's not always possible. Good example, the applications we received this year, we received 6 applications from Water Division 1, 2 from Water Division 2, 7 from Water Division 3, and 2 from Water Division 4. So we're going to have to do some juggling there to make it all work, and we'll be concerned about the logistics there. Bottom line, with 17 projects, and then 2 commissioners each, that's 34 commissioner slots, if you can think of it that way. And so since we have 10 commissioners, you kind of get the numbers that we're looking at. Each commissioner is going to have to shadow 3 or 4 projects each to make it all work. Okay. Right now, our project managers are busy writing up the recommendations, and they will also, as I said, they're setting up site visits. And when we assign these commissioners to the various projects, they will get invites. You will get invites to the various projects that you've been assigned. The next step in all this, going on that chart, that timeline you see, is in May, and with our commission select water meeting in May, middle of May. It's actually going to be May 12th this year. And at that time, we will walk through each of the 17 recommendations. So by that time, we will have been out on site, visited the projects, the project managers will have written up the recommendations and so forth. We'll be walking through every one of those projects, and we'll also have the sponsors in tow, either here virtual or virtually, to talk to you about their projects and their wishes to go forward with their projects. So that'll be in May, and that'll be a joint meeting with Select Water. And at that time, we'll be asking the commission for approval to begin consultant selection on the various projects for which you want to go forward on, okay? In June then, right after that commission meeting, we begin solicitation. We'll look for interest in projects, statements of interest, statements of qualification from consultants. July is our shortlisting exercise. We try to get to 5 firms, if you remember, if possible. It's not always possible, but based on qualifications. And then we do have to look at the statutes relative to residency concerns in state preference. Then late July, RFPs will go out to the shortlisted consultants. We'll then hold pre-proposal tours, and consultants will have about 1 month to put together their proposals. Then late August, proposals will be due. Those come in, we bundle them up and send them out to the selection teams. I should remind you, the selection teams are made up of 1 project manager, 2 commissioners, as we've already talked about. The sponsor obviously is part of that. And then there'll be 1 other advisor, typically a team of 5. An advisor could be somebody in our construction division, or maybe somebody from state engineer's office or so forth, depending on what makes the most sense relative to whatever the project is. So the rankings will come in and they go to Miranda, actually. This will be her first go around this fall doing that. And you'll have about 3 weeks to review your proposals. When you get your proposals, you'll have 3 weeks to review those, get your rankings into Miranda, and she will chase after you if you don't come back with your rankings in time, because there's a lot of people waiting to find out if they're going to get interviews or not. We interview the top 3 firms, okay? There'll be a couple weeks in there after we get those rankings, such that interviews will be the first week of October, and that's on your chart there with our October commission meeting. And that is typically first week of October this year. The interviews will be October 3rd through 5th, and it'll be butted up against the commission meeting on the 6th. And that's not a joint meeting, that's just commission only. And we'll be doing the interviews leading up to 2 or 3 days before, leading up to that October 6th meeting. So out of that process and the selected consultant, that whole process, we want to get through that process, select the consultant for each of the projects. And then if you remember the budget that's attached, those come in sealed envelopes. That's something that the selection team looks at the very end of the process in the interview rooms. And so we'll come out with for every project, we'll come out with a consultant and a dollar amount. And then the idea being that dollar amount then is then updated and taken into our recommendations that you'll see in November at the joint meeting. You've seen them before in May, just the to be determined recommendation for that project. But then in November, you see that recommendation again with now we plug in the dollar amount. That'll be in November. And then if everything goes well, then you would then get hardwired. Those dollar amounts get hardwired into the omnibus planning bill, which would be in December when we go through the omnibus planning bill with the commission and select water. And this coming session, the 2023 session, is a long session, 2-month session. So that means we will have a December meeting. Okay. And those dates have been set. So in 2023, the legislative session, as I mentioned, the long session, if it's approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, the omnibus bill, planning bill, we would be approving contracts for this new set, these 17 projects. We would theoretically be approving, if everything went according to Hoyle, and we expected it would, then in March of 2023, at that commission meeting, we would be approving those projects, the contracts for those projects. So like tomorrow, the 7 planning projects that you're going to be asked to approve as a result of the end of the last process. Okay, so it's a 13-month process. So you can kind of see we're starting off with 17 new projects that we're going to start going through the consultant selection and funding process, but we're wrapping up. And that's a little bit of an overlap here. March is our month. We're at the March meeting now. Tomorrow you would be asked to approve those 7 contracts that are from this old process. Okay, so that kind of puts it in context. So at this time, the only thing I would mention, if you look at the list, you'll see the projects there that have come in. 17 applications. There are 5 level 1 new development projects. A lot of those are master plans. There are 3 level 2 new development projects. A lot of those are feasibility studies, so forth. We have level 1 rehab projects, 4 of those. A lot of those are irrigation district master plans. And then 5 level 2 rehabilitation projects and drilling down on different issues and so forth, a lot of them with irrigation districts, so forth. I should tell you that the titles of the projects, the descriptions, and even the levels may change. At this point, it's very fluid. We just got these applications in. And remember, we haven't done the site visits, project managers haven't been out there, and the recommendations haven't been written, and that's all to come. We'll know a lot more. Things will get finalized for that May meeting. So the one thing I need to know today, or maybe even tomorrow, if you have any conflicts, next week we're going to be assigning commissioners various projects. Here again, we'll do the best to do it within your water division, but there may be some changes there just to make it all work logistically. And if you have a conflict, we need to know about that. If you see a sponsor there that you've done work for, or something that you perceive would be a conflict, let us know as soon as possible, so we won't have those issues to deal with after the fact. As I mentioned, we will then start the process, and in May we will be reviewing all the project applications. Okay. Lastly, we do have 2 state-sponsored projects I did want to mention. They're in the omnibus water planning bill now, and just waiting for the governor's signature on that. But the aging irrigation infrastructure assessment project, that was a $500,000 budget, and then the cloud seeding hydrological assessment project, $300,000 budget. Those made it through the legislature. They're intact. And we've completed shortlisting on those projects, and the RFPs will be going out this Thursday, pending once the governor signs the planning bill. And proposals will be due April 14th, and they'll be out to the selection teams on the 15th, and 2 weeks to review proposals and ranking and so forth. And interviews will be held prior to our upcoming May meeting. So this is a separate selection. If you remember, we've gone through the whole selection with the 7 projects, but these came in at the 11th hour, or state-sponsored projects. So we're kind of playing catch up a little bit. So these were on a very shortened, very condensed schedule to get these done and get them, interviewed and so forth, the proposals, RFPs, the whole deal. So that we'll do interviews right up in front of the May commission meeting, probably the morning of the workshop. And so that at that time, we can make recommendations at the May meeting relative to selection of consultants on those 2 projects. Okay. So that's a condensed timeline, and we'll also need, well, in this case, 2 projects, 2 commissioners each. We'll need four commissioners to help with those selection, but it's a very short timeline on those. So that's what's going on, the timeline. Hopefully, anything you want to add?
I got a question for you, Barry. You say there's maybe 4 commissioners that are going to be needed for these state-funded projects? 2 and 2. Okay. Is that going to be along the same time that we have to do the other request for proposals, read through them, so that we're not too overwhelmed?
Mr. Chairman, no, that'll be, those RFPs won't go out till the middle of the summer. We'll be way past the selection on the 2 state-sponsored projects at that time.
That's good. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Barry? Commissioner,
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to ask Barry if we're all invited to his house tonight to watch the game, and we could carpool over.
that sounds like a good plan. um, I guess if nobody else has any other questions or comments, we'll move forward. Thank you, Barry.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask Barry to stay up here for just a minute to help me through the summer tour. But I did see online that the Ribbon Chop House here in town is a watch party for tonight's game, just for information. Okay, so just wanted to give you a quick update on the summer tour. We're still looking at Afton. And as you may recall, I think we talked about this at the January meeting, but this is Representative Simpson's backyard. And we're looking at having the workshop on the 17th. We don't know exactly when that workshop will start, if it needs to start early. We're anticipating a lot of work to be done through some of the legislative bills that were going through session, and now that they didn't really work out for us and our program, that workshop might be shortened. So stay tuned on when we'll start that. We'll have the tour on the 18th and then the actual meeting on the 19th. We do have rooms reserved at the Kodiak Resort. The name of that, is that right? Kodiak Mountain Resort. And we have them starting the 16th, which would be Tuesday night, because I know a lot of people are going to have to travel quite a ways to get out to Afton. So we've got Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. We're hoping to get out, hopefully be finished by noon on Friday so everybody can get home at a reasonable hour for the weekend. I do have a question, I guess, for our staff and maybe Miranda. Do the individual commissioners need to call the Kodiak Mountain Resort and confirm, or is that all taken care of?
Is the rooms like, are they guaranteed reservations or what are they? Is that what they are? Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. Jason.
Okay, the only other information I'd provide on that is that I believe Representative Simpson is planning a Dutch oven feed at his house. And I think that'll be Wednesday night, if I remember correctly. But again, we'll get you more details as we get a little closer. So that's everything for that particular agenda item. I do have a couple of items under the discussion. The first one would be just a reminder. So the March meeting is election of officers. So you guys may want to get together tonight and figure out who's going to draw the short straw to be chairman next and vice chair and so on and so forth. So that'll be something on the action item list for first thing in the morning. So I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And then the only other thing is I would invite our new state engineer, Brandon Gebhardt, to come up and say a few words.
Congratulations, Brandon.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you letting me come up and just thank the commission. Through my 2 years at Water Development, I really enjoyed working with all of you. You guys have been great to me, very supportive, and I really do appreciate it. Me being the state engineer is bittersweet. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm really excited about it, but I'm also leaving a great staff and a great commission and a job that I really enjoyed. It was one of the highlights of my career and always will be. And you guys are all part of that. So thank you all very much. And that's all I had, unless you had any questions for me.
I'd like to thank you for being there after Harry Labondi. You know, I know he got kind of sick stuff, but anyway, after he left, I was glad that you came on board and you were sure great to work with. And one of the things I know that really resonated with me, I guess, was the fact that like it wasn't like you had to get in there and learn. You already had your mindset, knowing exactly kind of what to do in a sense. That's the part that I liked, because if you get somebody in a new position, then you have to wait for them to be trained and then, you know, all this other stuff. But I'm glad that how you stepped in there and took control right away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that was more of the duck complex. I might have been calm on the surface, but my legs were paddling. The staff really propped me up and had me prepared. So that's kudos to them.
Mr. Chairman, we'd just like to thank you, Brendan, for everything you did. You were great to work with. We enjoyed it. I'll miss you. And, you know, we're glad to have Jason, but we'll miss you terribly as well. And good luck in your new career.
I think one of the things that are great for us is that you're moving over to one of the agencies that we work with all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You won't be getting rid of me. I'll still be around.
Now we got somebody to answer those hard questions for us.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's all we have on the agenda for today. The meeting tomorrow will start at 8:30 a.m.
Well, I hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion make adjourn by Commissioner Salmi Dalton and then seconded by Commissioner Kaylee. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.